So welcome to the People Performance Podcast, where we discuss all things people performance. The People Performance Podcast is made up of 3 series. First up, we have the Leader Lounge episodes with me, the founder. Then we have the guest interview episodes. And finally, we have the performance episodes delivered by the T2 consultants. If after listening to our podcast, you want to get in touch with T2 about anything we do, please contact us at help@trans2performance.com. You can stream or listen to our podcast on all the usual platforms available. So for now, sit back, tune in, and enjoy the People Performance Podcast.
Coming up on this episode.
And we did induction for 1,000 people on the same day. We rented this huge hotel, and which could seat 1,000 desks. And these big microphones that you were carrying around. So I was actually belting out instructions on those microphones, getting people to fill in the forms and instructions. And it was, when I think back now, I think about how crazy it is.
You want to be unapologetically repetitive with the same messages until we absolutely are living and breathing them. There is no point in moving on.
I'm not scared of the guy who can shoot 10,000 shots, but I'm scared of the guy who shoots one shot 10,000 times. And it's something which I have tried to take into my leadership principles and my leadership values.
Trick to it is you have to see things for how they are, not better nor worse.
Boring is a new sexy.
Welcome to the People Performance Podcast with me, Martin Johnson.
Me, Kaushik Gopalan.
Kaushik, how are you?
Doing well, Martin. Excited on a Monday morning.
Welcome to T2HQ. Welcome to the podcast. I've been thinking for a while about trying to get you on. I sowed the seed a few weeks back and you said, let me think about it and let's have a chat about what that might be. And then we decided that you was going to come and participate in the podcast. How are you feeling about it?
I'm feeling really excited. And my first time to Hull. It's a beautiful place. I never expected to be, given all the negative connotations about you have about the place. But I've enjoyed the drive. And I've enjoyed the seaside. Water really calms me down. So it's a beautiful office. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're right on the Humber here. I just showed Kaushik the view, and it's absolutely like a mill pond this morning. So it's the best day to come and visit Hull. But you're right, we get a bad rap like a lot of the other northern cities and towns. But Hull is beautiful. We're proud of it, and it's nice to have you visit. So Kaushik, let's just, for the listeners, tell us a little bit about you. Where are you from? What is your what's your career background, and what is your current role as we speak?
Right. So I currently work as the Chief HR Officer for TransUnion, managing UK and Europe. Originally born and raised in India. Born in the south of India. Have pretty much lived my life south of India, except for a few years in Mumbai. And I've also lived in the UK before. I've lived in the US before. So I think of myself as a global citizen. Having exposures to multiple cultures. I'm very lucky that way because I think not many professionals get to live the life that I've lived so far. And my background has pretty much been in HR for the past 24 years in the HR function, not counting. I had an interesting start to my career, actually. I actually started off in the accounting side. My father was a banker for 35 years. He was in the same bank. And I was very enamored by what he did. And I did my undergrad in commerce, and then I did my graduation in commerce. And then I went to do something called a chartered accountancy, which is a course of becoming a chartered accountant. I did my first exam, and I did not enjoy it at all, being stuck behind a desk and verifying challans after challans, and it was not my cup of tea. So when I spoke to a few people, I had a school professor who was a big influence on me. And he said, you go to people, why don't you try something in management? Started exploring that side, ended up in management. Did my MBA from XIME in Bangalore. For the first 4 years, I was trying to find myself. At that time, the ITES sector was a huge boom in India. You had, massive amount of people joining and massive amount of people leaving in the same month as well. I still remember I think this has to be one of my career highlights is in one of the companies I used to work for, we inducted 1,000 people in a month. And we did induction for 1,000 people on the same day. We rented this huge hotel, and which could seat 1,000 desks. and these big microphones that you were carrying around. So I was actually belting out instructions of those microphones, getting people to fill in the forms and instructions. And it was, when I think back now, I think about how crazy it is. But I really enjoyed my phase there. And then, but I've done pretty much a lot of the HR life cycle across in both in ITES, IT, financial services, banking, and now with TransUnion.
Well, two things there, Kaushik. That's fascinating because I've known you a good few years now. We've worked together a lot, and I didn't know that about you. I didn't know that you started out in accountancy. I mean, that is the last profession I would ever expect you to be in. So it's probably the reason why you decided very quickly, this is not for me. And the second thing observation I make there is you are one of the most humanistic, people-focused people I've ever met. So you've obviously landed in the right profession. Fascinating story in the background. I'm going to loop back in later in the podcast to India and the culture of business in India compared to Europe, because I think that would be really interesting to explore. But let me just before we move on, let me just ask, a chief people officer or a chief HR officer or a HR director, there's many different titles you can have in organizations. If you was to try and describe what is the purpose of that role for an organization, how would you describe that?
So first of all, let me lead by saying that it's a privilege to do what I do. And I've always been, I've very early in my career, my mentor, my late mentor, he's no more unfortunately. He started by saying leadership is a privilege. And for me, when you lead people, it's an absolute privilege. My background in HR was something which I knew even before I got into management. I knew this is what I wanted to do. And for me, the chief people officer or the chief HR officer, I think the responsibility is that people are fundamental to everything we do. The way I look at the chief HR officer's job is essentially to provide structure and to provide guidance for an organization to function. So you see that it being interpreted in many ways. Like you can see a coach or a transformation expert, a change leader. You've got the Dave Aldrich model of the four roles of HR. But the way I look at it is very simply, the purpose is to provide a structure for work and provide guidance for how things can happen. So inside of that, you think about things like your culture champion, your legislative frameworks, your organization change management and your change resilience. But I think all of that is to make the organization tick, to make the organization function in a way that, is providing meaning and providing purpose to everybody who actually comes into the workplace. So I look at my job and my role essentially is to provide that structure, the base, the foundations on which an organization can thrive.
Love it. Love it. And I ask that question a lot because you can imagine you get a variation of answers, but I really resonate with the example you gave there. Okay. So we've worked together with you now for 2 or 3 years at TransUnion, maybe even more. It's been a pleasure. We're supporting your leadership journey. We're working with you and the executive team and the mid-management team. We've done a lot of self-awareness. We've introduced psychometric testing and profiling. We've done all sorts of leadership curriculums. But the one thing about you, Kaushik, and working with you is you don't like to move on too quickly. And what I mean by that is you would rather drill 1 or 2 or 3 things in an organization at a deep level than cover 12 things and dilute the value. And so, for example, when we've been working together, we've been working for 2 or 3 years and we're still focusing on the same topics: self-awareness, dialing up and down, how to be good in drudgery, which we'll come to, radical candor. We've talked about the same things because I think your theory is do 2 or 3 things really well rather than 12 things and dilute the value. Would that be a fair assessment?
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the things you know about me is I'm a big sports buff. Kobe Bryant had a big influence on me. And one of the quotes that Kobe Bryant grew up listening to was the quote that Michael Jordan had made about, I'm not scared of the guy who can shoot 10,000 shots, but I'm scared of the guy who shoots one shot 10,000 times. And it's something which I have tried to take into my leadership principles and my leadership values. Early in my career, when I was in HR, and especially in the environment I was working in, a lot of times the HR function would get measured on the amount of things you did. So, how many new initiatives would you actually are you launching? How many new things are you launching? How many different things are you launching across the organization? Because that's what people craved. But what I've realized in my leadership journey is that it's not about the number of things you do, it's about seeing the whole thing through. So if you see a change, you implement the change, and then you measure the change and you repeat that. And I think that's what builds organizational muscle. And that's what I've been really happy to partner with T2P on, because I think from this time we started to do the work, which is about 2.5 years now, to now, I think we made tremendous amount of progress, which I see it actually acting out in our day-to-day lives. So the things about we spoke about, like the psychological safety piece, that doesn't get built in a day. That gets built over so many conversations, over so many interviews, and so many discussions and debates. But I think now we're at a stage where we understand the concept of the psychological safety, which was for me, in my capacity as the chief HR officer in the leadership team, that's something which I hold near and dear. Creating psychological safety amongst the leadership team, and you're aware we've had a lot of change in our organization per se. But I think that psychological safety, the work we have done around things like print, those things are fundamentally important for the fabric of our culture. And one of the things we keep getting reminded to us is that we've got a very good culture in the organization. I'm always, my ears always open up when people say we've got a good culture. What do you mean by that? What are those tangible evidences? And one of the things that keeps coming up in that is that we can have a conversation without the fear of being judged, or without the fear of being somebody's going to come and take action against me. And I value that. And I think as a leader, when I hear that, it makes me really proud about the work we've done. But it also reminds me how much of work that we continue to do. Because unlike, you take a pill for you get a fever, you can take a pill, the fever goes away. I don't look at it this way. I think it's like going to the gym to make yourself stay fit. And that's why the value of the work we do is so important. And that's why those two or three things that we've honed down in terms of psychological safety, radical candor, and making sure that we are all on the same page and that work continues is something which I absolutely value.
Yeah, I mean, I can say you are the customer, you are the organization I have worked with over a number of years where it suits me because you want to be unapologetically repetitive with the same messages until we absolutely are living and breathing them. There is no point in moving on. And like you say, it covered psychological safety and what it is and how we practice it and how we build it more than any other client. We have covered radical candor and the ability to speak openly and honestly and feed back to each other without it feeling sensitive. We've covered optimal performance, which we'll come on to in a second, and being good in drudgery and coming alive in drudgery. And we've used the print and attributes tools to be able to drive self-awareness at a senior level into the leadership team. And I don't think we've done much more than that. But we've drilled those four things for nearly 3 years now. And so much so that when I return, the common language that it's created in the team is clear to see. And you're right, one of the biggest challenges of a chief HR role or a chief people officer's role or a HR functions role is how do we demonstrate tangible value to the business for what we do? Because a lot of it is soft.
Yep.
A lot of it is there's no KPI or metric around culture. I mean, we know that we can put KPIs and metrics around it, but a lot of it is the feel, isn't it? You've just got to feel and observe and see the difference that it's making. And sometimes that's hard to quantify, isn't it?
Yep. And I think the value of the work has not just been in the leadership team, but it's been with the next level of leadership team as well. Like we've continued the work with the senior leadership team, which C2P helps us from that perspective as well. We did a fascinating thing. I don't think I had a chance to speak with you, but we actually hosted a print conference amongst the managers to understand as to how are they experiencing, how are they feeling, and how are they actually using some of the print attributes to drive certain behaviors in their respective teams. It was a fascinating conversation. And again, the feedback from that conversation amongst the managers was this was something which they have not had an experience of doing in many organizations, and it continues to be a differentiator for us. And it's something which is, I think, embedded into our current and our longer term strategy as well, as part of how do we continue that culture movement for us. So it's a I think in my leadership experience, for me, I'm always of the opinion that when you do something, do it really well, so people can see the impact, people can feel change before you move on to the next one. And that's kind of has been my guiding principles throughout.
I'm just going to draw back that sports analogy that you said again because I loved it. Michael Jordan said, "I'm not afraid of the guy who takes 10,000 shots. I'm afraid of the guy who takes the same shot 10,000 times."
Correct.
And that's just something probably on this podcast to take away already. How well are you doing one or two things repetitively and seeing it through to fruition, or are you spreading yourself too thinly and trying to do everything? I think that's probably one of the number one challenges most professionals would face in this busy, chaotic modern day world.
Yeah.
Um,
I was listening to your 2024 keynote of your of the T2 retreat, where you had just announced the release of your book, and you made a very, I think it was a very simple statement, but I thought it was a very powerful statement. You said the face of leadership is changing, but it's moving more towards the pleasure side. But if you don't experience the pain side, you will never find the optimal way to function. And I actually literally paused the podcast for like 3-4 minutes when I was driving, because I was reflecting on that particular statement, and it's so right at so many levels. Because I don't think if you do not know how to kind of alternate between the two, then you will never find your equilibrium per se.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and yeah, it's great because what you're referring to there is this thing I wrote in the book, but I'm also championing quite a lot in this modern day world is the balance of being able to endure pain and discomfort and seek pleasure and reward as tipped. And we live in this world now which only caters for us requiring comfort, reward, recognition, and pleasure. And in the absence of being able to experience discomfort, pain, and uncertainty, and actually sit in it and deal with it, our resilience levels of human being, they've been knocked out of kilter. And so leadership, as you know, and business is all about being able to endure pain, discomfort, uncertainty, challenge, overcoming obstacles, problems, and leading people through that. And so, yeah, it's an interest, and the work we've done with the team has all been about how do we get that balance? How do we? Yes, we want the good stuff. Yes, we want recognition, praise, reward. We want to feel fulfillment, but we also have to be able to be good in drudgery, which comes on to my next segue. One of the things I've talked a lot about with you and the TransUnion guys is forget high and peak performance. I know that one of the mantras we're working on with you guys is growth mindset and high performance. But I've sown the seed of this notion of optimal performance, which a lot of people will know who listen to the podcast and who work with T2. Optimal performance is this notion of, it's a team or individual that will do the best they can with the resources they have in the time they are given. It's the most optimal outcome I can do in the moment. And that might not always feel like high or peak. Sometimes it feels like drudgery. I talk about that word a lot. Sometimes you're papering over the cracks, or you're trying to do the best you can, and it might not feel like this utopian outcome that you would desire in an ideal world, but you've done the best you can, and you've made a decision, or you've solved a problem, or you've moved forward. And so that struck a chord with you, and it's something we've worked quite a lot. What's your opinion on that, Kaushik, around optimal performance and this notion of it's all about the flow moments and drudgery? And it's not just, there's no environment that ever just, that is ever constitutes high performance all the time. And if you're setting that bar, it's an unrealistic bar to set because it doesn't cater for the challenge and the adversity in your role, does it, and in your organization?
no, I think I can probably look at that in two dimensions, Martin. One is the professional dimension and personal dimension. I'll come to the professional dimension first. Is as an organization, we are going through massive amounts of change, and change is constant everywhere. I mean, I think I've been 24 years in the industry, and there's not been a single year where I've not had to see change. So change is there. But what was really useful for the framework for us was because the change velocity was so high, that framework became so useful for us to anchor on, to understand that there will be good days, but there will be days where it won't be so good. But it's important for us to go through both and find the optimal performance line for us to keep moving forward. I think my chief risk officer always likes to talk about the flag on the hill, but he's so right. The flag on the hill is what is going to get there, and the optimal performance is actually going to get us there. So we always celebrate the highs, and when we have wins and successes, etc. But I think in a very unique sort of way, I think you need to also celebrate drudgery as well, because I think that's what builds muscle. It builds the resilience. It builds the character, I think, of the organization per se. Because I've gone through drudgery in many forms in my career, and I've been a part of growing organizations. I've been a part of layoffs. I've had to let my own team members go at some point in time. They're not fun at all at any point in time. But I know it's built my character. It's given me the base and the values for me as a leader. I think I've built through the times when you go through the drudgery, because when you are having to really dig deep and come out, you actually find what is your level. And I think that framework has been really useful for us, because I think at some point in time, we've had to dig deep, and many times we've had to come out of that, and we've had to say, okay, this is what we can do. And I think last year we did a really good exercise, I think in sometime in October, where I think we paused and we said, look at the amount of stuff we've achieved. And I think in leadership, sometimes you kind of, because you're always looking at the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, you sometimes forget that. You forget how far you've come. And I think that was a good checkpoint. So I think that particular framework was so useful on the professional side. On the personal side, it came at such a right time for me, because I don't think I've ever shared this with you. When I was moving my family in 2023, I was going through a time where I was not pretty much at home, because I was here for about 2 to 3 weeks in a month. So my whole family was kind of trying to get me packed off and sent here. New country, a 10-year-old or 9-year-old who didn't really understand the Yorkshire accent, no friends, came into a new house, and I was at work. And again, my wife didn't have anyone. So we went through our own period of drudgery as a family. And I at least had work to go look forward to, but my family had only a new country to go and explore. And they were depending on me, because I was the only one who was driving at that time to take them around. But that framework actually really helped me, because I always knew that this drudgery is not going to last forever. But I always knew that's going to build character. That's going to build focus. So for me, having gone through the personal drudgery itself, it's made me a better human being. It's made me a better father, because I think I have understood what my daughter has gone through. I'm able to converse with her better. She's able to converse better with me. So it's been such a good frame of reference for us as we talk about achieving our optimal performance line.
I love that. And if my life's work's going to amount to anything, I think one of the things I'm trying to do is to say to people that when you are in drudgery, personally or professionally, the temptation for people, or the tendency for people, is to think that they're failing, to feel like they need to make a change, they need to get out, this is not right. And it's not. What I'm trying to say is, you're not failing. It's probably not as bad as you think. You're just doing it tough at the minute. And I was working with a client recently, and a great mentor of mine said this to me once, and I've never forgot it. He said, Martin, the trick to it is you have to see things for how they are, not better nor worse. And human beings tend to always try to do one of two things in a tricky situation. They'll either put their rose-tinted glasses on and see it as better than what it is. They'll minimize the problem, which means they'll probably not deal with it and hope it goes away. That's not good. Or they will catastrophize the problem, which means that they're not seeing it for what it is, and therefore, again, they're unlikely to be able to have the resilience and the staying power to sit in the discomfort and deal with it. So that saying of, in any walk of life, whether it's in the workplace or in your professional, personal life, see things for how they are, not better, nor worse. And drudgery, that is the most important time to do it, because that means you're doing it tough, your back's against the wall, you're not blessed with time or resources, there's external pressures and challenges, whatever it might be, but it's normal. So it's our job as leaders, if we take it back to the organization, it's our job as leaders to roll our sleeves up and lead us through drudgery and be good in drudgery. And I think that's a really refreshing message for a lot of people to hear. And so we absolutely buy into high performance, outcomes, but to link the two, what you then get is high performance. If you've got that flag on the hill and you know where you're going because we've set the vision or the goal and the mission is strong, the flag on the hill, if that's clear, you're more likely to be good in drudgery because you know why you're doing what you're doing. In the absence of the flag on the hill, it feels like a thankless task and people will give up in drudgery. So the flag, if you've got the flag on the hill and you keep going through flow and drudgery, high performance is the byproduct of continuous optimal performance. And that's the funny thing, Kaushik. People think a high performance outcome has all been plain sailing, excellence, execution. I bet if anybody unpicks, whether it's you winning a gold medal at the Olympics, or you win the Premier League if you're a football team, or you double-digit growth your business as a CEO, whatever it might be, I bet you could unpick it and you will uncover an awful lot of drudgery and hardships. And so optimal performance for me is the most realistic performance model that all organizations should be looking at.
Yeah, I think as you were saying something, do you remember the speech that Roger Federer gave in one of the school graduations that he turned up here? And he gave some statistics and numbers in his career. And he said, I have failed more than I have succeeded. And he talks about what that means. And he gives a very similar message to the students, the outgoing students, to say that, failure, success, it's all about context. So don't get too high when you're success. And when you don't get too hard on yourself when things don't going to happen, but never stop trying. Right. And I think for me, that's been a very powerful message out of the optimal performance model, because for a longest time, I believed in the high performance model. Right. And again, it's all been, I think the world has also kind of moved towards that high performance model, the what I call as a super athlete, or the super performer, or the super CEO, etc. Everything is accentuated. But for me, the optimal performance model really struck a chord, because what the CEO, the super athlete, it doesn't account for is, it doesn't account for that people are human. They have human limitations in terms of what they can or cannot do. Not everybody has the environment of, say, a LeBron James, for example, that he can spend $1 million on himself, on his diet and things like that. They don't have that capacity. So you're going to have to define that optimal performance levels for yourself. And I think that's why that model has been really useful. I saw a really interesting quote on this, which it took me a few days to consume in my head. It says, boring is a new sexy, was the quote. And I was like, why would somebody say that? But as I've understood and gone through the work that we've done, and also gone through the change in the organization, and even evolving in my own leadership journey, that's becoming so more and more true. It's the reviews, it's the MIS dashboards, it's the actions that you take, and then it's the repeatability. Those are the things which build an organization, and that's why that word drudgery is it's become my new favorite word.
I love it. I love it. Absolutely. So growing up in India and working in India for so many years and then coming across to the UK, culturally, is that different in terms of the way businesses and organizations view performance modeling and cultures? For example, every single, I don't know if it's just a common denominator of Indian people, but the vast majority of Indian executives, particularly that I've ever worked with in organizations, are hugely fast-paced, driven, direct, demanding, and it's like this culture of high performance is really embedded in that. Now, that I could probably guess that comes from trying to from coming with very little and trying to better yourselves, etc. But is that a common theme? And what are the differences culturally that you've observed between organizations and business in India versus, so, well, certainly the UK and Europe, as an example?
I always think about India in context in terms of where the country is, and I think it's important to understand that particular piece. In terms of the world superpowers, India is still a very young democracy. We're still about 80 years out from the time that we achieve our independence. But more importantly, we got liberalization only in 1990, which basically we opened our doors to capitalism only in 1990. So we're seeing a lot of these behaviors only in the last 35, 36 years per se. When my father started working in the bank, it was considered to be the most stable and probably the most sought after job for a middle class Indian family because it gave job security. That time, and even now, job security is really important for people in India. But as people have started to embrace capitalism, as people have started to embrace more of the risk return mindset, the capitalism boom is really strong in India now. And that's why you see a lot of the tech companies, especially, and now that's coming in other areas as well, where the Indian style of leadership is really starting to come out, where people are driven, people are really fast thinking, fast paced, result oriented, wanting to make a difference. Those things are starting to come out now. And the most infectious thing is that I love is the energy. Like the pace is so fast, is the energy that's there. So for me, the change has been remarkable in terms of how I've seen India. I've worked with business partners in Asia Pacific, Southeast Asia has a similar kind of I would say a rhythm to things over there. Again, when I've spent about 3 years in the US, the, the pace was not as big as what it is in India, for example, because like I said, in India you are constantly measured about how many things you do, how many initiatives that you do, and your survey scores and things like that. But what has been very different for me in Europe has been the things I would say are more measured, and people like to have a deeper understanding of things. And what I've really been fascinated and I've taken on board is that I've learned how to get better at doing things. So there is a tendency to get really deep down into topics. There's a tendency to really understand pros, cons, and then take a decision. There's a tendency also, I think, to just say um, things may not be perfect, is how I would have operated in India. But here we are on the journey to say, how can we get things to perfection? And that's been fascinating for me to understand how the pace of change actually works in all the three different regions that I worked in. And I've been able to bring some of it, but I've also been able to learn from some of it. Because again, like I said, it's an interesting study in demographic, I think.
It's interesting because we've always considered ourselves in the Western world, in the US and UK specifically, as fast, ultra fast paced, this. And when I meet and work with Indians, it's like, wow, this is a different level. And I remember you saying once in a meeting, like somebody was saying around, there's too much going on and it's fast. And you sort of smiled and went, this is not fast, right? Trust me, this is not fast compared to what I'm used to. So yeah, there's a real energy and pace to I think to business and organization, certainly in India. Okay, so that's the cultural difference. Let's move into leadership, and then we'll finish on change and change management. So, of course, you've been in leadership roles yourself, Kaushik, but more so you're working with many different leaders and supporting many different leaders and driving leadership development within your organization. What is I mean, God, this is such a big question, but I was going to say, like, two parts to it. What is the most important aspects of leadership for you, and how would you describe yourself as a leader?
Oh boy,
We
big
need another
question.
45 minutes for this.
Um, I think for me, the quality, I would say, if you were to ask me to pick one quality that I would say in a leader and also in myself, is authenticity. that for me is the core function of a good leader. And
So how would you define that, Kaushik? Like, there's many people would say, what does it mean to be authentic? And we can go off the attributes definition or whatever it might be, but why pick that? What do you actually mean if you was to break that down?
because I think for me, so the way I look at authenticity is that, are you truly being true to your values? That's why I look at authenticity. And I think authenticity fuels everything what you do as a leader. So think about your vision statements, and think about the mission statements, think about the goals that you set. If you're not authentically believing in them, and they are not truly reflecting of the fact that they are your values, then you will not achieve them. You may superficially achieve them, but they won't give you the sense of belonging and the sense of contentment that you are always looking for as a leader. Because, like I said before, leadership is a privilege. And if you're not being authentic, if I'm not being authentic in the way I think about my people, the way I think about my teams, the way I think about the organization, then I will not be in a position to lead people, and I will not be able to in a position to provide that structure and the guidance, because I would be living a false lie. In a sense, we'll be living in the matrix, so to speak, right? So, and for me, that drives a lot of my conversations. So when I came in, for example, to start leading this team in Europe, the first thing I told them is that you don't have to earn my trust. I have to earn your trust, because you're already here. You're already in this organization. You're clearly talented at what you do. But it's up to me now to build that psychological safety with you. And I think that style has suited me, my personality. But I also see that because of the authenticity that people have built within the leadership teams, especially using the psychological safety and the radical kind of framework, that's been a huge driver for us as a leadership team.
You mentioned something really interesting there, and I see many different leaders who take one of these two standpoints when it comes to trust. You said, when I arrived, I said, you don't have to earn my trust. I will give you my trust until it's broken, right? Or what, as an analogy. Then there's other people who will go, no, 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 you have to earn my trust before I give you it. I get psychologically and from a personality perspective why those two standpoints would be taken. But what you're saying there is, in leadership for you, you haven't got time to land somewhere and say to 12 to 20, 25 people, however many it is, you've all got to earn my trust first, because that's going to take an awful lot of time. And what you're saying is, I will trust you all. You are all here in these positions for a reason until anything tells me otherwise. I think that's a really interesting thing worth thinking about, because I think there's still quite a lot of leaders who take the other standpoint and say, no, no, you have to earn my trust before it's given.
Yeah, because I think for me, if you think about trust is far easy to transfer when you actually start trusting people first, right? And I think when you start doing that, then you create that psychological safety, and then the trust becomes so easy to transfer, and then your ways of working become that much easier. I have worked in other situations where I've had leaders who come and tell me, saying, listen, I don't know you, I don't trust you, you and I are going to have to take some time to understand each other. And that also works, no doubt about it. But when I look at the other way of working, where, I've had leaders who come and tell me, saying that I need to earn your trust, and I learned this from my mentor, and it was so easy. We worked so seamlessly. We didn't even have, it was almost like we were two peas in a pod. And things would just, we talk about the state of flow. That flow state was so easy, because you always knew that we were acting authentically, and we had the best interest in people's mind. So for me, I've always operated in that state of mind.
Love it. Right, final bit, and then I'm going to ask you one last question. Change and change management. It's been something you've encountered and operated within your entire career and led on change programs. Humans are not built for change, and I make that statement confidently, because what I mean by that, if you think about us biologically and evolutionary, we are built for stability and routine, because then it caters for our survival instincts. If the environment is not chaotic, if we can predict our environment, we feel in control. If we feel in control, We have less fight or flight moments, which means we feel better as a species. So change is not friendly for human beings at times. You think about modern day life and modern day organizations, change is so rapid, it's so fast, it's around us all of the time. And therefore, if you implement change in your organization poorly, it can be hugely detrimental to the culture because we don't like it anyway. So then when we do it poorly, we're only exacerbating the problem. So in your opinion, and again, this is a big topic, but what do the better organizations do when it comes to managing change or delivering effective change?
I think for me in my professional experience and even my personal experience, I think I would say the one big thing that large organizations do really well is communicate. Communication around change is so critical for us to get change right. And because you are like to your point, people are not built for change. This actually reminds me of very early in my career when I was experiencing change management. I had like a 4 hour debate with my boss at the time because he made a statement and he had a consulting background and he said people don't fundamentally change, Kaushik. And I was a young rookie who was starting off my career. I was like, how can you say that? If I wanted to go and learn Excel tomorrow, I can do it. If I want to go and learn a bike tomorrow, I can do it. I can change. I can absolutely change. And he said, think about what I'm saying. People don't fundamentally change. And that had a big impact on me. I still remember this was about 15, 20 years back in terms of that statement.
And what do you think he meant by that?
I think I think we're all built in a certain way. We all experience things in a certain way. Your experience, my experience is very different. We've grown up in different family backgrounds. We've grown up in different societal structures. So we've all grown up. And then I think you hit a particular age level, you are 90% of your personality is set. So you're not going to be able to change that. Now, I understood that really late. But what I have seen is that organizations which communicate change really well and which have a very structured way of communicating about change tend to have a better chance of executing change. And change, I think, not only thinking about, I think a lot of organizations get the macro communications about change right. Why are we be changing? What are we doing? And etc. But for me, the micro communications of change is what will drive change.
You make a really good point there, macro versus micro. And if anybody's listening to this, I think it's worth just elaborating on that because we work a lot with organizations on this. It's all right doing effective communications from the top at a macro level to the masses around here's what's going to happen, here's what you can expect, here's why we are doing this, right? And communicating, whether that's on email, newsletter, in town halls, whatever it might be, that macro level. Now, some organizations get that really right and really good. But we are fooling ourselves if we think that is enough. If we think that hundreds, if not thousands of people can take that communication, process it, interpret it in the right context, and get on board with it. So it's the micro efforts that then filter into each department and team. It's the management storytelling. It's the daily repetitive narrative. It's the reminding people why we're doing this and what's in it for the organization, but most importantly, what's in it for you. It's the incentives wrapped around it. It's the resources that are going to be deployed to be able to achieve it. It's all of that stuff that really matters, doesn't it? That macro stuff. You could get that really right and still fail, is what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the good models that I've come across and we've used is called the pitcher catcher model in terms, especially the micro elements of change. And when I've used it in multiple situations, but the one that I can think of is that when we were going through an acquisition, we trained all managers, all about 300, 400 managers on the pitcher catcher model. And we had very clear templates designed to tell them what is a change. And more importantly, what you said is what's in it for you. That part of it needs to be clearly answered by leadership, by line managers, by reviewing managers, because that's what will take people across on the change journey. So for me, getting those aspects is what I try to help in my job as a chief people officer in terms of providing structure, providing guidance, providing support. But most importantly, I think communication is everybody's job.
Love that. Kaushik, question. You've done it already on this podcast in 45 minutes a few times, but I am sometimes amazed at your ability to take in content, whether it's podcasts, videos, books. You're an avid reader like I am. We talk a lot about books and stuff, but not just go through the motions and listen to it and digest it and or read it. You have the ability to, and I have this ability too, so I'm interested in how you do it. You have this ability to take information, retain it, and then the ability to apply it to a context. That's rare. 90% of the people I engage with, if not more, will say, "Oh, I've read that book, but I can't remember anything about it." Or I did listen to that podcast, but I can't. And so people are consuming content, but in the absence of being able to retain it and apply it in a context, it's useless. How do you do that?
So I think there are two disciplines I hold myself very, very close to when I'm consuming content. One is I don't consume too much of content. Like, I'm very focused in terms of what content. So if you look at my podcast playlist, it's either about only two topics: leadership and management and sports. Those are the only two areas. So I've got an Indian podcast called the CHRO Mindset. I've got the High Performance Podcast. I've got the T2 podcast. I've got a few of those in those areas. I've got the Simon Sinek's podcast in that. And the and the sports podcast is basketball, cricket. I've got a huge variety of podcasts. So for me, staying focused on the content really helps. I don't consume other stuff. I get recommendations to stuff, but I don't listen too much to them, or I don't delve too much there, because the mind can only consume so much. That's one. The second thing is that, which also helps me, is that I try to visualize how much ever I can. So, for example, today morning when I was listening to your particular example about the leadership, I think you also mentioned one more thing, which was about empowerment, empowering leaders. And sometimes leaders should know when to empower, but sometimes leaders know when to take charge. And I was reflecting on that on myself, saying, interesting. When do I need to empower? Could I have done something better in terms of, do I need to empower or do I need to take charge? So as much as possible, I try to personalize it, my examples, or personalize it with situations that I'm listening to. So I'm not in a hurry to read books. I'm not in a hurry to listen to podcasts. There have been days when I've listened to podcasts like a couple of times. Like there was a high performance podcast on the sleep doctor, and it really changed my opinion about sleep, because I was paranoid about getting 8 hours of sleep. But post the podcast, I've really focused on the quality, and everybody has a certain rhythm to the podcast, a certain rhythm to how they sleep. So I internalize as much as I can, and those memories is what I kind of recollect on and come back and say, you know what, this is what I remembered because those examples are mine.
I'd pick up two things in that, Kaushik, is you've got to be in the right space and frame of mind to consume. Don't just do it for the sake of it. You've got to, I'm exactly the same. And number two, you said twice now, I paused the podcast or I put the book down to think about what I'd just heard or read. I do that quite a lot. I put my book down, I'll punch the paragraph into my notes, or I'll pause the podcast and I'll write a few notes on it to reflect on how does that relate to me and how do I interpret that, rather than just consuming. So there's a couple of tips in there, I think, for people to take out. Right, we're going to finish this podcast. I could talk to you all day.
Yes.
This could be 3 hours long, right? That's safe to say. We're going to finish this podcast by asking you a question that I ask every guest at the end of a podcast, which is, who is the greatest leader you've ever worked for? Ever. And this can be something like in your working career, an old sports coach, a school teacher, whatever. Who is the greatest leader you've ever operated under, and why?
So I used to work for a gentleman by name Mali Mahalingam. His name is Mali. He was my mentor. He's no more. He lost his life during COVID. And I would say 95% of my leadership style is because of him. I started working with him in 2008, I believe. Was it? No, 2006. And even his whole interview was such an interesting process. He called me and then he said, "Hey, do you want to have breakfast?" We had a 10-minute chat about I was working in IBM at that time, a 10-minute chat about what I was working on. And we spent 50 minutes talking about my family, my aspirations, understanding the human being. And that left such a positive impression on me. And he's the one he has kind of, imbibed the principles around authenticity, imbibed the principle around being credibility, showing up, even if you have to communicate the tough messages. So a lot of my leadership principles and even in life principles, I really owe it to him. So he would be the person, I would say.
Love it. Kaushik, thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin.
And we'll be back again shortly with another People Performance podcast.
Thank you for having me.
The People Performance Podcast, brought to you by T2.